Hello and welcome to This Is. Matt, what do you have there?
What I have here is the 2020 edition of the Blade Stealth 13. So I've been a hardcore Mac user since about like 2006-ish, and I've tried several times to go to Windows. I always hated the devices I'm on. And it's not a Windows thing. It's always the laptops I'm using. But now, with the Razer Blade Stealth 13, this is the first time I'm like, okay, this is my daily driver.
So Matt, I spent a fair bit of time with the early 2019 version of the Blade Stealth. That was my daily driver for a while. And something that really strikes me about what Razer does with the Blade, and the entire series of Blade laptops really, is the level of quality. And not so much in like the quality of like, you know, how powerful it is or anything, but in the actual build quality. So I think as someone who's coming from MacBooks, you could probably appreciate that Razer are one of, if not the only company who do the same sort of laptop design that Apple does, right? They start with a giant chunk of aluminum, they mill it out, and then in Razer's case, they do a very expensive anodization process to really make it that sort of super clean matte black look, which honestly, I feel like makes it the best looking laptop, period. I mean, there's just nothing else like it.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm very vain when it comes to laptops, which is why I like the MacBooks. It's just the very clean look. Having basically just a matte black MacBook Pro, I'm absolutely in love with it. Like, I don't think there's any other device on the market that looks as good as the Razer products here.
The Blade Stealth still takes advantage of 10th generation Core i7 processor, which is solid. They have upgraded this time around, so now is running at 25 watts instead of 15 watts, which, to be fair, the model that Matt has right now is a pre-production sample, so we can't run benchmarks on, but that should give it a little bit more performance. But what makes it more special is the fact that not only is it the very first laptop with the brand new 1650 Ti, but it also finally has a 120 hertz screen option.
I'll say that I got used to only being 1080 pretty quickly, going from 4K to 1080. It didn't bug me that much after like a couple days. The smoothness was really nice, and I did play a few games on it, especially like Rocket League.
I just feel like 4K is unnecessary on a 13-inch screen. Like, when you look at the PPI on 1080p, that small, like, I've always been 100% fine. Like, my XPS 13, I use the 1200p option. For me, I would rather have the battery life that comes with that lower resolution. And I would especially in this case like to have the extra smoothness, because that makes such a big difference for gaming and for everything, I guess.
You know, actually what I was missing the most is I had never had a touchscreen on a laptop before. And so I kind of got used to that with the 4K model.
Yep.
Because the 120 is actually only, it's not a touchscreen.
Dude, I am right there with you. Every time I use a Windows laptop without a touchscreen, I end up touching the screen without thinking about it. Like, it's not like the most important feature in the world, but just being able to just like scroll through a web page or something makes such a big difference.
This feels like just a slightly larger iPad to me. As far as like when I'm sitting down with it on the couch or something like that.
Matt, do you want to explain the difference in the shift keys that has driven everyone crazy?
Yeah, so it sounds like a really dumb thing, but when you're actually going to use it, I was ready to pull my hair out. So in last year's Stealth, they had a shortened right shift key, which sounds really dumb on paper that this would be a problem, but when you were going to type, just naturally where your finger would try and hit the shift key, it was actually hitting the up arrow. And so this year, they have gone with a regular size shift key in the normal place, and then they did like kind of the half up and down arrow keys, which works really well for me. I think it's just like a perfect keyboard layout now.
The thing for me is that the Blade Stealth has always, or at least for the last few years, occupied a very unique spot, and that this is a 13-inch gaming laptop. Now, obviously, with it being smaller, you've always had to sacrifice performance, right? This cannot hang with the 15-inch Blade, for example, which has up to double the cores, much beefier graphics. And while the graphics are better, the 1650 Ti, it's a max Q. They were quoting it somewhere around like 10% more powerful compared to the old 1650, so not a massive difference. Now, before, the quite expensive price tag on the Blade Stealth was an issue, but it was kind of okay and it was kind of justifiable, because when you look at $1,700, $1,800 for a laptop, and I know that the 120 hertz model starts at $1,800 this year, there's no competition, right? So it's kind of like, well, it's expensive, but it's hard to say. However, we recently did a video on the main channel on the Asus Rog Zephyrs G14. Now, this is a slightly larger laptop. It is a 14-inch design as opposed to 13, but it comes in at $1,450 with basically full-on like Blade 15 style specs, right? So you've got an 8-core Ryzen 9, you've got a full RTX 2060 Max Q. You're getting significantly more performance, and it is in a form factor which is not wildly bigger than the Blade Stealth.
Yeah, and I'll admit that's like one of the things that I really wish that that Razer would embrace, would be doing something like having Ryzen systems. I don't see that absolutely happening anytime soon, because a lot of especially with the Stealth, because a lot of their ecosystem is being able to do Thunderbolt going into eGPU, which is, to be fair, how I use this. If I want more power, I just plug it into a eGPU.
But when you look at a laptop, which is not that much bigger, not that much thicker, significantly cheaper by several $100s, and much, much more powerful, it's a bit of a tough sell. Like, if that Zephyrs never existed, if AMD hadn't caught up in such a big way with Ryzen, I think the Blade Stealth would be like, oh look, it's a great update to one of my favorite small gaming laptops. But now, I don't know about you, Matt, and I know that you have used the Blade Stealth in the past, but for me, I'd rather carry that Zephyrs. I feel like it's a better overall deal at the moment.
For me, like I said before, I just really don't like the look of a quote-unquote gaming laptop. And I still feel like the Zephyrs is still, it's understated a little bit. It's definitely not one of the most, egregious for being a gaming laptop, but it still looks like something I don't want to really bring to a meeting or something like that. I understand that part of the reason this costs so much more is the build quality. I know that you were talking with Razer, and they kind of explained their anodization process and how expensive.
It's crazy.
Yeah, you wanna explain that?
It's a very, very nice premium feature, but it also adds significant cost. Now, when you're looking at something like a Blade 15, which could be $2,000 plus, another $100, $200 on the build isn't the end of the world when you consider everything else. But when you look at something like the Blade Stealth, which obviously is playing in that sub $2,000 category, then you're like, oh, you know what? That is a very significant chunk of the budget, right?
I'm not going to say that this is a value machine, but in my opinion, it's just getting something this beautiful and this powerful in a small form factor is good for me.
No, and I totally understand that. And I don't want to hate on the Blade Stealth. Also, there is the fact that you can go down, if you don't need the GPU, you can go down to get the integrated graphics model, which still comes in that sort of white/silver finish. Yeah. That's cool. That's great, right? And I've always appreciated Razer products for their design. It's just to me that before, I was kind of okay with the price because there was really no competition. You could not get another laptop with that sort of same size and that sort of level of performance. It just really didn't exist. However, now there is one, and it is just the price, the value proposition just for me went from being kind of okay to just not really acceptable anymore, which sucks because the Blade Stealth is a very, very cool laptop. And if they were able to knock off even another $100, $200 off of it, I think it would be a really compelling value proposition.
Now, let me ask you this. How much of that do you think is because they're using Intel versus,
Yeah. So I don't know. Obviously, none of us know how expensive these components are, right? So the graphics are likely, the graphics are certainly cheaper because they're, it's a 2060 versus a 1650 Ti. So certainly the graphics are cheaper. I wouldn't be surprised though if AMD would provide Ryzen chips for cheaper than Intel. That to me sounds about right. The Blade Stealth is a great laptop, and I feel like for many people, it is a very solid recommendation. But for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, if you're okay with putting up with a slightly larger design, what you're getting is something which is cheaper and more powerful. And that's a really tough combination to argue against.
I will tell you that the deciding factor for me, sticking with the Razer laptop versus literally any other Windows laptop out there, is the trackpad. I think it's better than the MacBook trackpad personally.
Now, I'll give you it's a good trackpad. I still feel like it's not quite on the level of a MacBook trackpad, but it is very good. I'll give you that.
It's little things like that. The key travel on these, the keyboard, I think is just a perfect feel for me. The trackpad is just a perfect feel for me.
No one is going to pick up the Blade Stealth and complain about the keyboard now. It is a perfectly competent, respectable keyboard. I'm curious, Matt, so obviously the Blade Stealth has some advantages in size, but I feel like part of the reason why we were even doing this video is you had a lot of thoughts on switching from Mac to Windows, right? Beyond the hardware, have you found yourself able to use the Blade Stealth to replace your MacBook to do things like, Photoshop and some of the more productive tasks that you do for this is?
I would say right now I'm about 80-20 going from Windows to Mac for just in my daily life. So for a while I was only using the iPad to do any of the productivity things for this is. I was doing all of that on the iPad, but now I find myself doing all those productivity like email, writing in we use Google Docs. I've been doing that all on the Blade Stealth. And really the only thing I have been going back to Mac for is the creative things.
I feel like the Blade Stealth is certainly a small gaming laptop first and everything else second.
Right.
I think it does a good job of being an ultrabook, right? So like when I had my old Blade Stealth, I didn't really play that many games on it. I definitely carried it around with me everywhere and wrote a lot of documents and that kind of thing. But for me, I will give it some credit that it is certainly a smaller design. I just think that at the end of the day, it's tough to justify spending that level of money on a laptop which is very good, but it is not as powerful as I think it ultimately could be. And I think that kind of holds back that value proposition.
Again, I can't argue that point. I know that like on paper, I love the Zephyrs more than the Blade, Blade Stealth, but when I got my hands on both of them, this is the one I end up going with.
Well, that's an excellent way to end this episode of This Is. Thank you guys very much for watching this quality quarantine content. I'll be over here without the Blade Stealth, and I guess Matt will be over there enjoying it and flexing on everyone who doesn't have one yet. Although Razer's gonna make you send that back. You realize it's pre-production, right?
I will say with the anodization process, I do notice with this one versus the old one, the edges are very sharp.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that is like one of the very first models off the line. So,
Yeah.
of course, big thanks to Razer for letting us borrow this one and at least take an early look. But until next time, Matt, do you have any parting words for your Razer fanboy following?
No. Subscribe to This Is.
That's it? That's as creative as you've got?
Thank you.